His pieces are both functional and artistic, with designs inspired by the world around us. His work explores how objects interact with each other, with space, and with their environment over time. On this edition of Art Now, we'll look at the work of Michael Schweggman.
Hi, welcome to Art Now, a program where we talk to artists whose work is part of our community. I'm Pat Salmon, and I'll be your host. Our guest today is Michael Schweggman. He has a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Ceramics from the University of Illinois, and he founded the Boneyard Pottery Studio in Champaign in 1995. His pottery has been featured in many regional exhibits and has won awards at many art festivals, including the Downtown Festival of Arts in Champaign. Today we're not only going to be talking to Michael about his work and look at some of his pieces, but he's also actually going to do a few pieces for us while we're here. Thanks for letting us come in today, Michael. I appreciate it.
Yep, anytime.
Okay, what sparked your interest in becoming a potter, and how did you decide to make it a profession?
Well, that's kind of an expansive question, but yeah, I started doing clay when I was in college. In '93, and I guess I always liked working with my hands and being somewhat creative, though I never really applied that. But when I started on clay, I really liked the throwing process, which is this. I really wanted to get good at that, and then after a while, it's just kind of what I thought about most of the time, so it made sense for me to stick with it. I mean, as far as making a living goes, I guess I wanted to continue to do this, but then also the freedom of self-employment and the challenge of trying to make that successful with my hands has kind of continued to drive that.
Okay. What do you find most interesting about working with clay as opposed to maybe having done some other kind of art medium?
I did a lot of different, I've done a lot of different things, in college and then just from time to time, but I guess one thing I like about clay is just actually working with the material itself, the way that it feels, the way that it responds to the way that I handle it. I've gotten a certain facility with it, so I suppose part of it is just from doing it for so long, you kind of stick with it, but I'm always excited about working with this material. It doesn't really feel like a job.
Yeah.
For me, it's you say, well, what is it about the material that you like? And I say, well, it's the material. So it is sort of begs the question, I guess. But yeah, it's really the responsiveness of it, the smoothness of it. I think as anyone who's rolled little mud snakes when they were a kid or squished it between their fingers, there's a certain there's a tactile thing, definite physical pleasure in moving the material around.
Yeah.
And so for me, that has always sort of been there,
Right.
And of course it's become more sophisticated, I don't roll snakes or anything anymore, but it's, that idea of continuing to work with the material and to find different ways to push it around has continued to drive that.
Right, and you've gotten kind of better technically too, as far as glazes and things like that.
Right, yeah. Ceramics, as a medium is very demanding technically. I won't put you to sleep with all the details. You're welcome to ask me about that if you like, but there's so much process involved and so many ways that things can go wrong along that process. But yeah, I've worked constantly over the years to develop my glaze palette and to get those glazes and forms to try to go together in a more unified way. So yeah, I think hopefully over the years, people would agree my work's improved. And I feel that it has.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gotten a better sense of what I'm trying to accomplish and a better grasp of the process.
Okay. Well, let's look at a few of your pieces now. We have this blue crackle plate, and one of my questions would be how you got that effect.
Yeah, well, the plate, most of the work I think that we'll see here is, starts thrown on the wheel, so just like this, and so there's that. And then as far as the glaze surface on there, there's a couple of glazes that I applied on there, but then the last glaze I apply on there has that ability to shrink and crack. If you look at like a riverbed, for example, that's usually a clay. So when it's if it's a dry riverbed, it'll have that same kind of sense. And so that glaze I formulated to shrink and like that during the firing, and so during the firing it splits apart and reveals what's underneath, which is more of that blue glaze.
Right.
So that's a surface that happens during the firing.
Right. Here's another platter you've worked on.
Yeah. So that one's newer, and that one has a what we call a copper red glaze, and then that glaze that looks kind of like trees or veins or something, that has wood ash in it. So when you burn wood, you're left behind the material, wood ash, and that is one of the components I put in that glaze, and that when that fires in the kiln, it creates that specific kind of texture.
Okay.
And it'll run and move in that, and it helps create that texture, but then it also will sort of bleed, and blend and kind of create a different transition between where I have the red glaze and the iron glaze.
Right. And here's one more.
Another similar, similar idea. Pretty much, they might even have been made around the same time. And but that one has what we would call a celadon glaze, a little bit more of a traditional kind of glaze, a celadon green.
Okay. I'm just curious, though. You said it kind of runs. Do you have any idea? Do you have any way to guide that, or does it simply happen when it's fired?
Yeah, over time, after having done it, thousands of times, I have a sense. But there is a variety. There is some surprise when I open the kiln, and part of what drives me to work with glazes in this way is that even though I fire these things, I still get the surprises.
Yeah.
So I fire the thing. I have a good sense. I mean, if I were to tell you I knew it was going to look exactly like that, I would be lying. But if I told you it was going to look kind of like that, then that would be the truth.
Okay.
So I have a sense of the general layout, the general idea of things. But there's always some surprises, and I try to glaze the work in many cases so that when I finish the things, there's a surprise. For me. I mean, for you, you're seeing it the first time. There's no. I mean, it's just a piece. But for me, I like the idea of that. The process, there's you're subjecting all these things to very harsh natural forces, fire of 2,400 degrees in this. So I encourage the clay and the material to have changes that occur, and I want that to be evident in the work, and for me it keeps it exciting.
Yeah. Okay, we have a red jar here.
Yep, another jar. It's got a lid on it, has a red copper red glaze and some of the ash glaze on the middle. I made a series of these for a lady that wanted a cookie jar. So I made, I think, 4 of them, and they all came out. I usually make more than one if someone's ordering something, and all 4 of them came out really nice. So.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Okay, we have a mug here.
Yep, kind of more straightforward kind of thing people can relate to a mug. But I still I want things to have a kind of sculptural sense. So I have, you have what you identify as a mug. You have a cylinder, and you have a handle. And then I put a little thing on the handle, which actually is kind of for your thumb. And I think most people that have picked up one of these mugs agree that little nub on there really makes it in terms of comfort and usability. So I think sculpturally the thing works well, but for a mug, I think it really has to function well too. And that can be lots of things, It needs to hold the heat, it needs to be comfortable to hold, comfortable to use. There's a lot of things that are involved in that. But then also too, if you can't use the thing, meaning that you're only seeing a picture of it, I want it to function really well as just something to look at.
Right.
But of course, these you can use.
Okay. And here's a tea bowl.
Yeah, that's also a newer piece. So those I throw on the wheel, and then I use a wire and a knife to cut away at those and create really a sculptural piece. So you're seeing the side of the piece, and it's got a little foot, which gives it that lift.
Oh, okay.
So these things, they work as a bowl. We use them at home for soup and ice cream and whatever. But, kind of based on a idea of a tea bowl, for
Right.
like tea ceremony. But
Right.
I don't do tea ceremony personally, but I do
Right.
eat things out of bowls. So that's
Right.
that's what teas are.
Right, and there's
Yeah,
another one.
Here's another one with a newer glaze I'm working on. You can see that glaze pouring down, kind of. Don't people say it looks like melting ice cream or
Yeah,
something
it does.
like that? And,
Yeah.
and it's I think, a real beautiful sense where that glaze starts to take on its own sculptural quality.
Right. Okay, next we've got some jugs here.
Yep.
We've got a
So you have
trio.
Right. You got 3 jugs, or I mean, everybody understands jugs is kind of in a form, whatever, for whiskey or pickle juice or whatever you want to use. And but rather than just making another jug that you might mistake for something being made 500 years ago, I wanted to put my own kind of touch to it so people understand it as a jug because it has a handle. But that also becomes on these, I think, more of a sculptural thing. So you have
Right.
this visual activity on the side and in the glaze, but then the handle and the tops where they start to curve and undulate at the top creates more of a 3-dimensional sculptural area. So here's
Right.
3 of the same kind of idea, but little different shapes, and I put them in a group to kind of show a range.
Right. And we have a water pitcher.
Yeah, so these I started making many years ago. They've evolved into something very different. So the first ones I saw were based on some old Chinese pots.
Okay.
But this would be very far removed from that. The only thing might be related is that it has a spout and a handle. But I mean, this piece is close to 2 foot tall.
Okay.
And so sometimes the scale in the pictures is a little bit different.
Right.
And, so though it will function, I mean, it can pour, I really think of these as a sculptural object. So
Right.
referencing the idea of a pouring vessel or of, that kind of thing. But I mean, someone could use it, but I think it would be more ceremonious.
Right.
That. But,
Right.
But yeah, and so here I'm combining some ideas of, you have all these surfaces, which I think are luscious, and then you have these, the 3-dimensional parts of it moving and undulating, trying to really create a sense of the activity or the movement that is present when I'm making the thing, but of course once it's fired, it's very rigid, it's like stone.
Right.
So I'm still trying to convey that sense that this is a very material that can be very much alive and have emotion to it.
Right. And then we have
So yeah, this would
a
be
ewer here.
an older version of that. Maybe this was made, I don't know, 02 maybe, 2002. I might be wrong on the year, but
Yeah.
yeah, a few years ago. And so you can see where this one's a nice piece, but more, has a vertical axis, sort of straight up and down.
More traditional.
Yeah, more traditional.
Yeah.
So this is starting to depart from the original. I don't have a very old one. I don't have an image of that one, but if you were to look back, another 7 years before this, you would see them even more, more traditional.
Right.
Here, the glaze activity is getting more. The handle's starting to move a bit.
Right. Okay. And we have red splash
Yep.
trumpet, you call this.
Another vase there. Yeah,
Yes,
so kind
it's
of
beautiful.
a more traditional kind of shape. Just real simple shape, clean. It lifts up. If you were to have flowers in there, you could see how the angles of that would point towards the flowers and towards the bouquet
Right.
or sticks or what you might put in there. But then creating a glaze on the side, which really has a nice visual depth. I mean, to me, that's something that's important in all the work.
Right.
Is to have glazes which you almost look like you might be looking through something.
Yeah, I had that impression looking at it. It was almost, for a minute, I thought it was glass because
Yeah.
of the gray.
Right.
And, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That you can see. I want there to be a depth to that. The glazes are beautiful, I think, on their own, and the way that I try to layer them up with the matte and the gloss and the different textures to create, that 2-dimensional depth that kind of goes also, since the piece has a 3-dimensional depth by nature.
Right. And we have an iron bottle here.
Yeah, that piece is about 3 foot tall. And so as you can see, as the glaze scale kind of changes, so it's the same kind of glazing that you'll see on other pieces. But, on a larger piece, you can see how it starts to change. And so when I started to make the pieces larger, they become still a large bottle. But I mean, if that were a foot tall, you might think of it as a vase or a bottle. But when it's 3 foot tall, it starts to become a sculpture, almost
Exactly.
like a person.
Right.
So you take something which is a large, is an object which people understand, and then you scale it up, and it makes them consider it in a different way.
Right.
And so, for my work, though a lot of the work might be bowls, mugs, vases, that kind of thing, I still think of them as sculptures, and I want that. I think scale is one way to get other people to start to consider them as sculptures as well.
Right.
Because they'll see that, and the scale of it makes them say, oh, well, now they'll look more attentively at the details, because its scale demands that.
Right.
And then when they see that scale, then they might go to another smaller piece and start to look at the details more now.
Right.
So sometimes it's just it's not as simple just to scale it up, but in concept, you simply scale something up, and then people start to see the beauty in it.
Right.
And then they start to look at the normal size version of it, and they say, oh, okay, well, now I see something in this that I've been missing all along.
Right, so it's kind of a way to lead them there.
You got it.
Yeah,
Exactly. You got it.
Okay. Let's take a break from looking at these for a minute. I just wanted to ask, kind of, what do you think are the sources of inspiration for your designs? I mean, how do you?
A lot of different sources.
What do you? Yeah.
That's a good question. Again, that can be a lot of different things, because a lot, depends on the work that I'm doing, can come from different places. But certainly, I'm looking at pots, and ceramics is a long tradition and a history, so there's a lot of that available that we can look at. I look at the human form and the human body, so the gesture, skin. I look at landscapes, so there's definitely presence of landscapes, both what we would call a natural landscape, like mountains and trees and that kind of thing, but also an urban landscape.
Yeah.
I would argue that they both are natural, but let's not talk about that. But
right.
So looking at looking at man-made things, buildings, even the guts of a building, the plumbing, the pipework, the fittings.
Yeah.
And then how do those things go together? So you have an urban landscape and you have a natural landscape, or you have, a human hand touches a faucet, and there's a connection there.
Right.
Or there's a building that's in a park or up against, or you look at a building, and past that building there is a landscape or a tree. And so how do we reconcile in our brains that those things are together? We might compartmentalize them in one way, but then we also, when we're looking at them, we see them together, and there they are.
Right.
And so part of me, part of it is, I'm not trying to make a big statement and say, hey, everybody, notice this is something important. It's just like, this is what we all see. This is what I see, and I try to find a way for myself to reconcile that. How do I put that together? Yeah. So architecture, pipes,
Right. Yeah, I thought some of the next pieces kind of reflect some of those things.
So this one would maybe 2008 or 9 or something, a couple years ago. So I make these kind of jug form, but also too, you think of a pottery shape. You have a vase or a jug or a bottle, and I make these things, and so why just have one spout? I mean, I'm making them. I can put as many spouts as I want on these things, so why not?
Sure.
And then so here, these are a little bit newer, so same kind of idea, but I decided to start making the spouts more literally like pipes, or more literally like plumbing fixtures or that kind of thing. So these might be based a little bit on pre-Columbian work. You would see these old kind of marriage vessels, these things with handles and that. But no one would ever mistake this for pre-Columbian work.
No.
But those kind of shapes are still have a relevance, and then these would function as vases. You could put a flower in there if you wanted. I think of them as sculptures. I mean, but some people say, well, what is this for? Well, you put a flower in it. And then that could also be more dramatic, too, to have, some sticks or a small, bouquet or maybe a vine coming out of it. So I don't think it's required, but it does have that ability.
Right. This one, you actually called it landscape vase.
Yeah, this one is probably the newest one I think I've done. And this one's pretty large. It's about 2 foot across and has, I think, 11 or so spouts on it. So I was making these things, and they generally would have 2 to 4 spouts on them. And then I said, well, why not just keep going?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at a skyline or something, you're seeing many, many, many building tops.
Right.
Or if you look at a roof of a building, you usually see many things coming out the top of it. But a lot of people say, oh, this looks like a car engine, looks like mufflers, and that's okay too, because I don't think it confuses anyone. No one thinks that this is a car engine. No one thinks it's a pipe organ. No one thinks it's a building. Right. But it refers to all those things. Right. And it starts, and then you have this kind of pottery shape or these glazes, which are just beautiful on its own. I mean, if you saw this a million years from now and you had no idea what pottery or buildings, or if you had no context, you still might think this is a beautiful object, or you might not. You might hate it.
Right.
But I think that what I'm trying to do is get all these different things that I think are interesting and put them together in a way. And people say, "Oh, how do you get this metal on?" Well, it's all ceramic. It's all clay.
Okay.
But again, I'm not trying to fool anyone. I just want them to think of it as referring to all these various things.
Right. Okay, and this one is distiller.
Yeah, so this one starts to have maybe a little bit more of an apparent function, though it doesn't actually function. But yeah, like a moonshine still, or whatever. I mean, you can use a still to distill water. It doesn't have to be moonshine.
Right.
But yeah, so this has the same kind of idea, but then this one maybe has a little bit more of a statement, because you think about what is moonshine, or who makes that, or why did they make it. It's a counterculture symbol. So most of my work isn't really about making a direct political statement. I'd say these maybe inherently have some kind of statement. I'm not necessarily a proponent of moonshine. I don't care one way or another about that, but I think more about what it represents and how that refers to me. Here I am. I'm going against what the mainstream says is okay. I'm an artist. I work with my hands. I do this on my own. And if there's something that I want that I can't get, and that's what I make. The same as a moonshine guy says, well, he can't go buy, alcohol, but he can make it himself.
Right.
And so this sort of, in a way, it refers to what I do as an artist. There isn't anyone who's doing it on their own.
Right.
And so it's not always about that, though everyone can identify with the distilling, the moonshine, the hillbillies, all that kind of thing.
Right.
But it's more like, I am doing something with my life, as a self-employed independent artist, which goes against a lot of the typical expectation.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. And then this last one was three bottles.
Yeah, three bottles. This might be a little bit older, but yeah. So here, I'm showing. Sometimes it's the space between the pieces or around the pieces that might be more interesting. So you have three shapes, which are nice on their own, but then together, when you put them together, you start to see new shapes in between, which I think can be very interesting.
Right. Yeah, these actually seem very sculptural to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. If you saw only one, you might just think like, okay, it's just a bottle.
Right.
Yeah, or you might not. But I mean, one might think of, okay, it's just a piece, but then as together, then we start to really pay attention to the difference in curves between them. They're all basically the same size, the same glaze, but depending on where the curves are put, really change the character of that individual piece.
Right. Okay. At this point now, since you've agreed to actually work on a few pieces for us, we'll just have you. Right. Yes, I'm going to put you to work, and if you can just talk a little bit about what you're doing as you do it.
Sure. So this is called throwing, basically, turning or whatever. I use porcelain, so there's a fair amount of prep that goes into the clay before I get to this point, and a fair amount of stuff that happens after. But this is the part that I enjoy a lot, and most people think it's all about this. And it is, for me, a lot about this. But so first thing I do is, I have the wheel going, and I have an electric foot pedal, and that's what powers this wheel. There's kick wheels and other kinds of ways to drive them, but this is run by electricity.
Okay.
So I use a little bit of water, and that helps it slide. And I'm centering the clay now. The idea is to get it into an even mass. If the thing is off center and wobbly when you're trying to come up, it'll be harder to control.
Right.
So I just try to keep it. You need to get it centered. Then I open it up, and I'm not going to go all the way down, but I go most of the way down. I'm going to just make a small bowl here.
Okay.
So I want to leave enough space. I want to leave some clay on the bottom because that'll be the bottom of the bowl, basically. And then I start to open it up a little bit, start on my curve. And then I'm pinching the clay between my fingers. And as the wheel goes around, as I pinch the clay, then it starts to come up. Now I've done this for, what year is this? 18 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I'm pretty good at it. And I know that sounds arrogant, but
no.
I've done it a lot. And we have classes, and we have students come in, and I usually try not to throw right away because I'm kind of show them a little bit, because I think it looks very easy, but it can be very challenging. For me, it's easy now because I've done it
Sure.
for so many years, probably hundreds of thousands of times. But what I'm doing is, you can see that kind of spiral, and that's the evidence of where my finger has been. So I pull the clay up and generally get the shape about where I want. So what I've done now is just thin the clay out, and then I go back with what we call a rib and start to shape that piece. So when I was a little kid, which I had forgotten about until a few years ago, we used to go to this kind of funny, it was called Silver Dollar City. It's in Missouri, and it's like a pioneer theme park thing.
I've heard of it, yeah.
And anyway, they have like glass blowers and potters and candle makers and all that kind of thing. And so I remember I would sit and watch the potter all day, and it just seemed like magic. And it wasn't really, as far as I knew, my impetus for doing this, but it really is a beautiful process to watch and to see a master at work. I think for anybody, it's hard to not be a little excited about it, because it really just looks like something. Well, I don't know, something magical happened. So this one's a little bigger than those that I made. I wanted to make it a little bigger just so you could kind of see. Maybe I could do one more if you want.
Sure, that'd be great.
Next one I'll do will be more of a cylinder. I'll make like the start of a pitcher. So
Okay.
that involves pulling a cylinder and then a little bit of after work. But then I'll have to wait some time before I put a handle, so we won't be able to see that today. But
Yeah.
you can come by later and I'll show you that.
Yeah, it really is like magic to just watch it rise up.
Yeah, it really is. I use it. I have a mirror here which I look at, and that helps me. Because right now I'm over the top of the piece, so in the mirror it allows me to see the profile of the piece, so I have an idea of what I'm doing and working on. So same process. Always get the clay on the wheel, get it centered. It always starts the same. So we open it up again. Now here, instead of making a rounded bottom, I'll have a flat bottom because we're going to do a pitcher, and I won't trim it out. So again, this always takes a short amount of time. Well, for me, because I've done it so much, and a couple of reasons. One is I've just got a lot of practice in, so I'm faster. But the faster you kind of work, then the more fresh the piece tend to look. It doesn't look overworked. You want it to have a certain amount of look like it kind of just grew, or like there's a certain spontaneity to it. And clay has that kind of memory. So if you fuss with the piece for too long, then it tends to show it and look overworked. Not always, but it's good practice to get in and get out. To work quickly.
So you really have to be thinking all the time when you're working.
Yeah, I'd say, I definitely, I know what I'm going to do. I have a plan. I know the shape I'm going. There's a certain amount of spontaneity, of course. If I was just a machine, then there would be no point for me. But yeah, I try to. I definitely have a plan, and I don't divert too much from that plan. But I may make this thing, and then the next one say, well, that wasn't such a good idea. The next one I'm going to do something different.
Well, thanks so much for talking to us and letting us see your work.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Anytime.
Okay. Thanks for watching Art Now. Our guest has been Michael Schweggman, and you can see his work locally at Boneyard Pottery in Champaign and at their website, which is www.boneyardpottery.com. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we also hope it will inspire you to explore the local art scene and to make your own art now.